So, in the next part, I would like to come to this debate about the old establishment versus the new elite. In
Yeah.
your newsletter, you highlighted how the Australian media and most of the Western media misinterpreted Mr. Amit Shah's comments about English. So, do you think the old establishment and parties like the INC would come to accept this new middle class elite that has emerged during the BJP rule, that does not prioritize English so much and is not also ashamed to display their Hinduness and India's old ethos and culture?
The old Nehruvian establishment clearly has lost its primacy in India, and that's not something that's only happened since Narendra Modi took office in 2014. It was starting to happen even before then. I mean, remember Rajiv Gandhi, not Rahul, Rajiv Gandhi started his reelection campaign in Ayodhya, right? That's something that Nehru would never have condoned. Campaigning on the Ram Temple issue as a Nehru Gandhi family member. The old establishment recognized the challenge that was coming, tried to adopt some of its rhetoric as its own, has lost that battle, and there is a new establishment in India. The old establishment, however, has not given up. And unfortunately for India, and I think this is unfortunate for India at least, much of that battle is now being fought in the West, meaning that they know they've lost the battle in India. They're not winning elections. They're not getting the pages in the newspapers. Even the English language newspapers are increasingly accepting that the old establishment Nehruvian view of India has disappeared and maybe wasn't ever right in the first place. So even the English language press is no longer with the old Nehruvian establishment, I think they recognize their day is over and they've become relics. I mean, Karan Thapar even famously said this on his interview program that people like me are relics of a past that's disappearing. However, they still control the international media understanding of India. Um, they're the ones who have access to writing for the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Times of London, or for that matter, the Australian and the Sydney Morning Herald here in Australia. And so they're taking out their anger and frustration um, in the Western press, which just makes India look bad because the rest of the world is getting this narrative. And my recent newsletter was about a narrative over Amit Shah's comments about switching from using English to using native Indian languages, which many people in South India rightly perceive as a threat to their own Indian languages. That the people in South India who want Tamil and English, or Kannada and English, or Telugu and English as the two primary languages, um, are feel threatened, and rightly so, by Amit Shah implying that the future will be Tamil and Hindi, Telugu and Hindi. Uh, so, there's a real issue there. But this was presented in the conservative Western media, the Times of London, the Spectator, the Australian, as an a BJP assault on India's English heritage. Now, of course, in India, and this is presented this way by an Indian establishment writer. Now, in India, that narrative won't fly. If you tried to publish in India saying, Amit Shah is an anti-colonialist, how dare he question the wisdom of British colonialism? That would be a non-starter, right? But in the Western press, in the Western conservative media, it's a very sympathetic narrative. Oh, this terrible ideologue, Amit Shah, who's very close to Narendra Modi, believes that British colonialism was a bad thing for India. And so conservatives in the West are thinking, oh, he's some kind of, terrible, non-Western or anti-Western figure. No one says that, oh, by the way, Shashi Tharoor also wrote a book against British colonialism, because they know the weakness of, again, they know the weakness of conservative media in the West. So the same author who pitched an article to the Times of London about Amit Shah criticizing the use of English also had an article in The Guardian. What was that about? About transsexual Indians helping promote HIV awareness. Now, she knows, like, you want to pitch to the Times, it's Modi's anti-English. You want to pitch to The Guardian, it's, oh, Modi's anti-trans. Right? And you can't switch those, because The Guardian wouldn't be interested in an apologia for colonialism, and the Times wouldn't be interested in a pro-trans pride narrative. So it's a very intentional propagandistic effort to shape Western perceptions of India in a negative way by sophisticated Indians with a good knowledge of the Western world and the Western mind, who are selectively appealing to people to oppose the current Indian government.
Maybe the BJP could make use of Mr. Shashi Tharoor to counter all these people.
Well, they have made a lot of use of Shashi Tharoor, to the point, as I'm sure you're aware, that it's rumored that he might someday join the BJP. I obviously have no insights into that, but they certainly do take advantage of Shashi Tharoor.
So now I want to come to the part of your book where you highlight how Muslim Indians should be integrated into the mainstream in India, and how Hindu Indians must come to accept the history of Muslims in India is there. So, how do you think it's possible under the current BJP government under Prime Minister Modi? Do you think Prime Minister Modi and the current BJP could probably reference their own party leaders like Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who were perceived to be much more inclusive?
Yeah. Look, we have an expression in America: only Nixon could go to China. And the reason Nixon could create a US-China alignment was that he was the most anti-communist person in America, so he had the political capital to do it. In the same way, Narendramodi or Amit Shah or YogiAdityanath, if they were to valorize Muslim heritage in India, that would count for a whole lot more than a Congress leader doing it, or a lesser known spokesman. But that said, my real point in the book is not that governments need to do this, but that communities need to do this. Now, when I say need, I mean if they want India to be a successful democracy in the future. If they don't care about that, they don't have to do this. I mean, the fundamental problem of Indian democracy today is that the Indian nation, the cohesive group of people who form India's civil society, the Indian nation is overwhelmingly Hindu. Now, that's not the fault of the Hindus. If you and I organize to make a club, it's not our fault for creating good things that someone else isn't part of it. But the fact is, in a democracy, having 14% of the population not participating fully, they're not necessarily excluded. They're allowed to participate, but they're just not there. They're not there at the events. They're not there in the civil society organizations. They're not there in the consultations. Yes, a Muslim imam who leads a clerics association will be there, but ordinary Muslims participate in India's nation-building civil society at very low levels. They have to be invited in if India wants to have a future where there isn't this division, where Muslim Indians feel that they're just as Indian as Hindu Indians. I mean, shockingly, on the survey question, when you ask Hindu Indians, do you have to be Hindu to be an Indian? Yeah, they say yes or no. It's not a strong pattern. When you ask Muslim Indians, do you have to be Hindu to be Indian? They say yes. You have to be Hindu to be truly Indian, because they perceive that. Now, I'm not assigning blame. If I wanted to assign blame, the person I would blame is Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He's the one who created the idea that Muslim Indians were not Indian, that they were Pakistanis. And it was Muslim Indian intellectuals who left the country after partition in overwhelming numbers. I mean, for the areas we have data for, 95, 98% of Muslim Indian intellectuals, even when they're from areas that would become part of India, they're from Kerala, they're from Uttar Pradesh, they left to go to Pakistan. Okay, so it's not the fault of Hindu Indians that Indian civil society is overwhelmingly Hindu, but it is nonetheless the responsibility of Hindu Indians to bring Muslims into that community if they want to have a unified country going forward. Now, it's also the responsibility of Muslim Indians to want to join. There's no one way about this. If I were to guess, just speaking as a sociologist, I think the outreach has to come from the majority community, but then the minority community has to grasp that hand. Neither can do it on its own. And Muslim Indian organizations have been terribly irresponsible in wanting separateness and not wanting to join the Indian mainstream. And that has to end as well. It's not all on one side.
So, how do you think it can be achieved through community events, celebrating festivals together, more participation in civil society organizations?
Look, I think official affirmative action is generally a bad idea because it creates resentments. However, civil society affirmative action, if a media organization is putting on a conclave like the ones I've been invited to, they could go through the guest list and make sure, we want to have 15% Muslims at our list. And maybe the people who paid their money to come were 98% Hindu. And so they say, we'll invite these 50 leading Muslim thinkers. We'll give them a free ticket just to come because we want to have this mixing of peoples. Now, it's in a way unfair to put that burden on corporations and civil society organizations. I'm not telling them that they have to do it. I'm telling them if they don't do it, this division will fester forever. And so if Indians want to have a more unified nation, they have to take responsibility for making it happen.
Fair enough. So my last few questions would be about Mr. Yogi Adityanath and the INC. You record how Mr. Yogi Adityanath has transformed from a firebrand Hindu leader to a development-oriented chief minister. So, do you think the BJP underutilized him in 2024 elections, and how do you see his future in the BJP? Do you see him as a potential successor to Mr. Modi given his young age?
There's a whole chapter in the book on Yogi Adityanath, and that chapter is there to introduce India to Western audiences. If I were to say to Western audiences, look at the inspiring story of Narendra Modi, they would say, yeah, we have that in our countries. You can be born to a poor family. I mean, just look at J.D. Vance, the current U.S. vice president, born to a poor family, but rises up and becomes vice president of the country. Sorry?
Anthony Albanese as well in
Anthony
Australia.
Albanese in Australia. I mean, it's not the Yogi Adityanath phenomenon is purely Indian. You can't find a story like Yogi Adityanath in the Western world. And so I wanted to use his personal story, and it may be a hackneyed phrase, but his personal journey to educate Westerners about how India is different. And Yogi Adityanath has clearly changed the way he behaves, become more inclusive. Now, he's still a firebrand. He's still, likely, he still says many things that can reasonably be construed as being Islamophobic. There's no doubt about that. He still behaves in ways that can be reasonably construed as being Islamophobic. But he's moderated his language. He always says, I'm going to enforce law for all people equally. There's a lot of evidence that he does at least listen to organized Muslim opinion. He wants to win, or at least not lose, Muslim votes as much as possible. He's never going to be he's never going to win a majority of Muslim votes. He's never going to be a Muslim saint, right? That's not his. That's not his transformation. But in his transition from a history as a very exclusivist Hindu nationalist to being a mainstream pragmatic politician, he's modernized. And that's how I presented in the chapter, is that he's gone from being a traditional leader in the Goraknath Math, he's the head of the Goraknath Math, he's a traditional Indian religious leader, to being a modern politician. And although he might not have come all the way, I mean, he's no Shashi Tharoor, and he's never going to attend Western media events and be the star speaker on their panel. But he's come a long way from where he was 20 years ago. And if enough people make that transition, if enough Indians go from being very communal and exclusivist to being open to the other side, trying to be fair. Yeah, they're still communal. They still, they're still clearly on one side or the other, but they're open. They're talking. They're trying to make policy that's good for everybody. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? We don't want the good. We don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good in politics. And so, yeah, the whole chapter is devoted to YogiAdityanath. I go through some of his specific legislation and try to explain to Westerners how the legislation, while it can be represented as patriarchal or Islamophobic, in fact, in the context of the Indian electorate, it might be popular both among Muslims and Hindus. It might be beneficial to women. Things that we would think in the West are patriarchal, like having a couple see a civil magistrate before an interfaith marriage. Oh, that's patriarchal. It's wanting to control women's bodies, et cetera. Well, we don't have the problem in the West that women are raped and then shamed into marrying their rapists. It doesn't happen in Australia, but it does happen in Uttar Pradesh. Right? So this kind of civic safeguard in the Indian environment can be construed as secular and pro-woman, even though in the Australian context, it would be viewed as communal and patriarchal. So trying to change people's just point of view, instead of looking this way at India, to look straight at India, is really a goal of the book. That's what all of chapter 2 is dedicated to.
So my final question would be about the INC and its future. You highlight how the INC doesn't have a cohesive ideology. So do you think going forward it'll be difficult for them to counter the BJP and lose out to more regional parties who will take on the BJP?
The problem is not the lack of a coherent ideology. Most parties in India lack a coherent ideology. And now that Narendra Modi's announced a caste census, you could even say that the BJP lacks a coherent ideology. The problem for Congress is that it is a traditionally organized political party surviving in a modern world. The modern world doesn't have political parties that are run by families. Pakistan has that. Bangladesh has that. Tunisia has that. The Philippines, Indonesia has that. The US, Australia, UK, Germany, Canada, we don't have family-run parties. And the problem for the INC is that they did too well in 2024. They still lost the election, but there are now 100 new MPs in the INC who owe their seat to getting the word from Sonia and Rahul, with the result that the attempt to break the family power over the INC that was occurring before the 2024 election, when Shashi Tharoor challenged the family for leadership of the party, that pressure for reform that was building up, it's gone. I mean, it's completely gone, and it'll be gone even if the INC loses the 2029 election. That's then the story will be, well, we only lost one election, right? It'll be likely be until 2034 that the INC has another opportunity for reform. Now, that's not just a problem for the INC, that's a problem for Indian democracy.
Fair enough. Professor, it remains to be seen how the INC will, if they'll win or not. I would like to once again thank you for your time, taking out time from your very hectic schedule and for a fabulous interview. And I would like to congratulate you on the book again. And I hope to meet you in India if you come. Hopefully, you come this year. And I will be linking the link to the book below. And I encourage all, especially Indian audience and the Western audience, who want to gain a better understanding of India. This is your perfect book. So thank you, Professor Babones.
Thanks a lot. Take care.